I'd actually like to quickly introduce and share a little bit more about what you do here. I've got an incredible bio for you. And you're a development executive with 20 plus years of experience, shaping people's strategies and building high-performing teams across North America and Europe. And you're currently leading a talent development for Louis Vuitton in the Americas, supporting 5,000 employees across 12 countries. So that's an intergenerational team. We've got different cultures, a lot of diversity there. And so, I'd like to start, before we get into our questions, about what's the most interesting part of what you do?
People. Because they're the most unpredictable commodity in the marketplace. If they're in the market, you would never put your money into them, ultimately, because somebody can turn up one way on day one, and day two, they can be completely different. So that's what keeps me awake at night sometimes, but also what gets me out of the bed in the morning as well. So, yes.
Awesome. Okay. So let's get right into it. And, we've talked a lot about generational differences at work. And so I'd like to know, based on your research, because this is definitely a topic of interest for you, based on your research and experience, what are you actually seeing? Is it true that we're so different?
I don't think we're really that different when it comes down to it. And we moved away from using the word multi-gen to intergenerational, because simply, if you say multi-gen, you're already creating those silos. And I don't know about all of you, but I feel the world is so polarized right now that the more we enhance it, the more we're contributing to the unpredictable nature of the world we live in. So when we look at our teams, and yes, we've got 5,000, and yes, they're across 12 countries, but they're also across 4 business units. So we get a good sense of what really matters to our teams. And when it comes down to it, and all the research will say, everybody wants to work for an organization who treats them well, pays them fairly, gives them growth, respects what they do on a day-to-day basis and where they feel they're adding value. And that's regardless if you're 21 or 71. And so I always find it fascinating when you look at research and they're like, millennials want this and Gen X want this. And I'm like, but I want what they want and they want what I want. So we're actually really not that different. Now, what will be different, and what the Bob Duffy's book on the generation myth speaks about, is the things that do impact people at work is life stages. So if you take, for example, somebody who's 30 years old, they could be in many different phases of their lives. They might be a first-time parent. They might be caring for an elderly parent. They may have moved countries. And so how they turn up at work will look different. But that's because of the time in their life they're at. It doesn't matter if they're 30, 35, or 40. And when I arrived to the US 11 years ago into my role, which had been vacant for 16 months, so that was also interesting. I'm not a millennial, I'm a little bit older than millennial, but I was getting very upset with people, what I said were millennium bashing. So everything that was going wrong, it was the millennials. And I'm like, it cannot be a whole generation. So I set about designing multi-gen training for all of our teams. So now we have the intergenerational training for like individual contributors, so how to work in an intergenerational team and then how to lead them, to try and make sure that our teams feel equipped. But it's not what happens in the classroom that really matters. It's what happens when they're out with their teams on the floor. And so we just create a lot of transparency, because our engagement surveys show that all our teams want transparency, regardless of the age. So now we really, like you were saying, Marcia, we over-communicate lots of different things. And we create lots of different platforms where they can come together so that they're learning from each other. And a really good example of something we did recently was a hackathon, particularly working on AI, and we had all age groups around the table. And I think sometimes people feel that people using AI are going to be 21. I'm not 21 and I use it all the time. And when we have a new coaching tool, an AI coaching tool, and what the data is showing us is actually it's our older employees that are using it more often, and our younger generations are a little bit worried and skeptical about it because they think they might replace them at some point. So yes. No, I don't think we're that different. Sorry. I'm sure other people may feel differently, and I'm not saying it's easy leading people today, but it's actually what's happening maybe in the team or in the company or with the leader that's really determining how that person turns up, regardless of what age they are.
You know what, my next question was going to be about that. Like, what is it that makes intergenerational teams successful? For those that are saying, I have a millennial problem, or I'm having difficulty integrating my generations, what makes them successful?
I think it's quite it's simple. It's a team where you've got psychological safety. And I know that obviously everyone reads Amy Edmondson's book on a fearless organization, but especially when you combine then in AI, we have this unpredictable world where people are coming to work and what they want is somewhere safer than what they might have needed in the past. And I think leaders and teams that have that psychological safety, they're more open to, collaboration, sharing ideas, going into the sandpit of AI and playing around and figuring it out. Like Marcia spoke about growth mindset, we also have that integrated across all of the organization from day one, from the onboarding experience, and then it goes through as a very clear pillar across all of our training. So for example, next week we're training all our teams on our new AI tool, but we're starting off with growth mindset because our AI tool might be obsolete in 6 months, but what won't be obsolete is the mindset behind it. And what you really need to do is create that culture where they're okay with going and playing in the sandpit. So really and truly, it's psychological safety. And I'm sure everyone's familiar with the Aristotle project that Google did. And their one defining result was that the differentiator of a high-performing team was psychological safety.
Wow. Okay, and we talked a lot about trust and building psychological safety. Now you have the added challenge of a very large organization and one that is globally recognized. Mm-hmm. How does that introduce some challenges?
Oh, it definitely has its challenges. I think, the brand is the brand. And yes, I'm very proud to work for them, but ultimately, we wouldn't be where we are if we didn't make mistakes. Now, we don't make mistakes twice because that's just silly. But we are okay with making mistakes twice. And I'll give you a good example. So for those of you who don't know the story of Louis Vuitton, he left home at the age of 14 and he walked for 2 years to Paris. And he got employed by a box maker. And then he decided he was going to be the best box maker. But he took until 34 to open his own business because he really wanted to do like trial and error. And then he opened stores. But in London, for example, Marcia, he opened 3 stores before the 3rd store was successful. And so when we think about our organization, and it's really interesting because I used to work for Louis Vuitton in Europe, and we often imported the training from Europe to the US, but now what we're doing is exporting it back to France. And actually our global team in Paris are now bringing growth mindset into all of their trainings, which is a huge shift. So we talk a lot about building the bridge as we walk across it, and I could tell so many stories about how many amazing things we have done literally at the last second. But on that point, there's a lot of super hard workers, best-in-class leaders, really great human beings. I wouldn't have stayed if it was, what people think it might be. But it's very down to earth and very humble. And our best leaders are the most authentic and the ones that are with the best humility as well. And so all of that to say is like, we don't have all the answers. And I think the best leaders are the ones who admit to not having all the answers, but having that intergenerational team and allowing people to propose those ideas and work collectively with a clear vision, then there's nothing that will stop you.
Absolutely. I had no idea that was what happened to Louis Vuitton.
Yeah, he didn't like his stepmother. That's
really?
The real story, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Don't worry, it is written down. I'm not telling you any big secrets.
Well, that'll motivate you to walk 2 years, huh?
14.
Oh my goodness.
See a 14-year-old doing that now.
Wow, yeah, absolutely. They'd call an Uber. So, sometimes when we're sitting at the top of our organizations, we want to design an incredible employee experience, but we're not the only ones responsible for that, right? We have a team and a group of leaders that need to create that experience for their teams and those who report to them. So as you're developing your leaders who are ultimately responsible for the employee experience, what is it that you're instilling in them in addition to that growth mindset so that they can continue on and create that positive experience?
Yeah, it's an ongoing challenge. And, when you think about the 70-20-10 rule around adult learning and you think about the 3 pillars, exposure, experience, and education, like that 10% is only the education piece. And what we're trying to do is take all of our training and our development and make it super operational. So when that person learns a skill, they immediately apply it. And we're trying to really train our leaders in being people developers. We've we're in the process, and I'm leading a project on implementing a skills-based organization for the Americas right now. And our biggest opportunity is the skill around developing self and others. And so we're really having to flip their brains in terms of like, what is their role as a leader? And, you know, if I go back to my 20-something-year-old self, you know, being a leader of a young person is a huge responsibility. And I think people just take it for granted sometimes, but that right leader can change your whole life. And I was lucky to work for amazing people in London when I turned up first, but they changed my life. And what we're trying to do is break those silos and those barriers and those biases between generations, but also instill in the leader that this is your responsibility to grow those, you know, these up and coming talents, because what they're bringing to work right now, and their skills are very different than what we would have gone to. You know, I'm laughing at Marcia with the introduction of a laptop. My big moment was the introduction of a BlackBerry, and now I've got BlackBerry frown. But anyway, I'm going to try and get rid of it. But, you know, those teams and those leaders really need to take the time to figure out like what, and not everyone needs to be a leader. Mm-hmm. Not everyone needs to be a people leader either, which is even a bigger ask. And I think too often we promote really strong individual contributors and make them people leaders, because if they can do A, they can do B, which is never the case, or not often the case. And so, you know, we're trying to really change people's mindset about what it is to be a leader. And if you look at the data, which is a bit frightening, but anyway, 75, so our workforce globally will be 75% made up of millennials and Gen Zs by 2030. But only 7% of Gen Zs want to be people leaders at the moment. Mm-hmm. Now, they might change, but like we have a lot of work to do, because if they don't see the job of a people leader as been something that's rewarding, fulfilling, and aspirational, then that number is never going to increase.
Absolutely. And I love how you talked about how the first thing you're going to do is change the minds of people and reorient them to be people developers and not just people leaders. And I think you're absolutely right. Having leaders that pour into you so that you can do more really changes your experience, because you're looking at this person like, wow, okay, they want me to develop, they want me to do better. And sometimes just by way of having those high expectations, you're striving to fulfill them more.
Yeah, and just being transparent. Like, I would be mindful to say we don't want to change people's minds, because people own their own minds at the end of the day. You know, you can be transparent about expectations about what it means to be a people leader, and what they're accountable for and what that's going to mean to them. But ultimately, it's down to them, they're adults at the end of the day, to decide what they're going to do. And you're either in or you're out. You know, I just feel there's too many people skimming on the midway line.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about AI now.
Yes.
And so as it relates to intergenerational teams, so what would you say, and what do you think leaders should be thinking about when it comes to using AI to lead teams across the different generations and different career stages?
Yeah, I think with AI, I love AI. But I don't like it just because it's a tool. I like it because of the mindset and the hopefully the simplification it's going to bring. But I think sometimes we can get distracted by the noise. And, you know, in our organization, when we started to use or embrace AI, we found that lots of teams were chasing different solutions. And what it meant was they were getting distracted from the job that they needed to do. And so what we did then was we pulled back and we're integrating our own AI platform ourselves, and then having an AI team behind it. And I think, you know, first of all, it's here. It's not going anywhere. Second of all, you have to jump in the sandpit and play with it. We're all learning together. So whether you're a leader or a CEO, you probably know as much or as little as the 21-year-old. And, you know, it's really creating the organizations that will thrive in this era will not be the ones with the fanciest tools, but the ones with the best learning culture, and those who are with adaptive leadership and that can actually learn as they go, make mistakes, pivot, and then move on. I hope it will just I suppose, reduce the busy work, the meaningless work, the administration, and get smart people doing smart work. And this is where it goes back to the Gen Zs. And it was interesting, I've got a nephew who's, he'll kill me for talking about him, but anyway, he can't hear me. But he's 17, and he spoke at the equivalent of the Irish Parliament last week as a youth group on AI, because the government wanted to find out. And, you know, I just thought it was really interesting because he actually, I thought he'd be super like like enthusiastic about AI, but he's actually quite scared of AI. And what I realize is though their worlds seem big, they're actually quite small because they've grown up with the internet. So I offered to introduce him to one of my best friends who has a PhD in AI and has 20 years work experience. And my nephew said, no, I've got my people, Auntie Anya. I was like, no, you don't. But he thinks he has this cluster of 4 people and the internet and YouTube, which is where he gets everything from. But his world is so small. And I felt quite sorry for him as well, because I was like, the world's a big, beautiful place, maybe sometimes scary, but you have to be, going back to organizations, we have to all get into Samba together and realize that people have different fears and anxieties around AI. And going back to what I was saying earlier, I think too many organizations assume that if they're younger generations, they'll want to do it. Mm-hmm. And what you were saying, Marcia, about this change as well, you know, what people look for in times of change is stability, is hope, is, you know, that's trust. And I think those are things really lacking in the world right now, so which over-indexes those coming to work. So that's more what they're going to look for on top of AI. And that's why I think the world of work is never going to be the same again. I'm okay with that because I love a challenge. But you know, everybody has to get on this bus together, basically, because it's off. It's
off. It's definitely off.
Yeah.
And it's funny you say that, because I have been hearing that Gen Z is very apprehensive towards AI because it's impacting their job prospects, it's impacting their safety online. Mm. And I also assume the same thing, that they would be gung-ho about it, they would be really, you know, they take it on and run with it. And I found that interesting to hear.
No,
myself.
It is interesting. And I think, you know, they don't know what they don't know at this point. And being a Gen X, you know, we're the last generation that will have worked in a non-digital workplace. And we've got a bigger responsibility to kind of open their eyes a little bit. And yes, it'll change their jobs. It's not going to, I'm not going to say otherwise. But if you take, for example, IKEA with their call agents at the call center, I think that came up at the Deloitte conference recently as well. Instead of just answering questions for clients, they retrained their call center agents to be online interior designers, so that the clients could get the information about the product, where it was, et cetera, but then if they got through to a call agent, they could talk about colors and space and measurements and things like that. So that sounds like a much nicer job. Mm-hmm. So I just think it's kind of like, how do we use these super smart kids coming through? Like, honestly, if I had my nephew's brain, I'd be a better person. But like, use their skills, but also open up their worlds a little bit, because, you know, they're our future, and they're going to be 75% of our workforce, along with millennials. So we need to change the way we work.
Exactly. And as we're designing these workplaces for the future, for whichever generation, I'd love to know, from your perspective, is there a way or an approach that you're taking to measuring how successful you are at creating positive employee experiences? What are the tools that you're using, or the approach that you're taking to figure that out, especially with such a large
So what do we do, and what would I like us to do is two different things. So let's start with what we are doing. Like, we have an engagement survey, and interesting enough, last year, LVMH did their first engagement survey, proper one. And so we have another one coming up in October. Actually, the first one was 2 years ago. And so, yes, we're using that. But the survey isn't as good as a survey. What you do afterwards, that matters. So we have done considerable work around, like, the feedback and the transparency and all the other data points that came through. We do have a bonus structure whereby people leaders are rewarded for being a good people leader, which I think it's the first year we're doing it, so more to come on that. But, you know, we also have we've just moved into a new office in New York as well, and it's all open plan. And for me, who was used to having our office, like, you're on the floor now, and I think you can see who the good people leaders are. You know, you can really get that feeling. And it's the same if you go to a store. You can sense the magic of a store once you walk in. So there's no hiding, I think, at this point. And our CEO is exceptionally transparent, and she's all about breaking down silos and working in collaboration and so on. So you've got your data points, but you also then have the day-to-day kind of observations and feedback from the team. And of course, then you've got your lever report and things like that to work from.
Absolutely. And it's funny that you mentioned, you know, you could sense that magic, because ultimately what we're creating with employee experience is a feeling through these different touch points with the organization, with the technology that we're using. We're looking after a feeling that's going to ultimately keep these high performers on our teams. So I think it's very interesting that we flipped the script and looked at how similar we actually are across generations, and looking at it more from a lens of what stage in life are you, and what do you have going on. So that's been really interesting to hear, and I think let's turn it over to the audience for a few questions with our last couple of minutes. We've got a few.
Good morning.
Morning.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. Thank you so much for your insights. It's really interesting to hear how your company is doing it. So the younger generation at my job, as well as my teenage and 20-something children, are less apprehensive about AI taking their jobs and more concerned about water usage, environmental impacts, ethical concerns. I've been sent more times than I can care to count articles about, this is just the dystopian future if we continue down this path, or no, it's going to solve everything, and we're going to have a better society. How do you calm or get buy-in from people who have those myriad of concerns about adopting AI? Because it sounds like you're very much on the bandwagon and you see the possibilities and the potential for it. But you also talked about meeting people where they were and communicating or over communicating with them. So how do you balance those?
Yeah, that actually came up last week because we have a new AI coaching tool and we're integrating it into one of our leadership programs, and we made the usage of the tool voluntary. We didn't say they had to do it. And of course, yes, if you look at the data centers and you look at the graduation speeches that happened in the US over the last couple of months, and people getting booed once they talked about AI. But my I suppose response to them when they were asking me about that was like, you don't have to use AI for everything. Use it for something you want to challenge yourself on. But more importantly, going speaking to somebody doesn't damage the environment. So if there's somebody sitting beside you, ask them. That's your better resource. So it's not like we're swinging completely just to use AI. And yes, there will be people, and we're all on this journey. Like even Mark Zuckerberg said he doesn't know what the world's going to look like in 5 years. So I think there's a lot of scaremongering out there. Now, I'm not an AI expert, so I can't say whether it's going to be doomsday for us or it's going to just be thing like the internet and we all got on with it and we're still here today. So I think it's just having a conversation and understanding like what's behind their fear, and if it is environmental impact or data protection and so on, like talk to them about how they can navigate that and like using AI responsibly. And also going back to what I was saying earlier about my nephews, like opening their minds to say, you don't just have to use YouTube and AI to get all your answers, like go and speak to this person. Because I think they're very apprehensive about one-to-one conversations or people interactions as well. So yeah, but it is a journey. Look, I'm not going to say I have all the answers. Louis Vuitton don't have all the answers either. And then Mark Zuckerberg doesn't know what's going to happen in 5 years. Then who knows?
I think there was another question.
I was going to actually say something very similar, that in my team, a very intergenerational team, there is a lot of hesitation from some of them on the environmental impacts and environmental racism that takes place as a result of it. So because I am completely embracing AI, I love it and live it every day, I asked it to tell me what the environmental impacts were. And it was quite interesting. And I presented this back to the team. And it said, yes, absolutely, there are environmental impacts. And yes, here are what they are, and so on. But it also talked about the environmental impacts of a Google search, and of how many emails it costs. It made the kind of equivalent things, which was eye-opening to them, but did not win them over. I did ask ChatGPT for its sources. Teen Magazine was one of the sources that it had. However, it had Washington Post, New York Times, and a number of others. So I'm trying to show them that I am open and understanding that definitely there are some implications, but here's what else is out there. And I think you're right in your response is to when to use it, and that there is this hesitancy about one-on-one, What I have found, so I'm not really asking you a question, I'm just speaking because
It's okay.
you already answered. What I have found, though, is the group that are reluctant, they have started using, they're all hybrid, they've started using some of our offsite locations to get together themselves and bounce ideas off each other. And they're finding tremendous value in that. So I think that's terrific. If that's going to work better for them than using AI, then that's fine. But it is a challenge having them see that. And we don't have formal, I work at a hospital in the Maritimes, and we don't embrace it formally, but yet every pocket of the leadership group uses AI. So we don't have a formal approach to it yet. Anyway, it's not embedded in Copilot through Microsoft Teams or anything yet. But anyway, just thought I'd share that.
No, that's super interesting, and thanks for sharing, because it's you know, when I was talking to the team as well about it, I was like, okay, so if we're going to be using this amount of energy to get what we need to do, then let's think about, like, we've got a huge sustainability policy and efforts as well, so we can then offset and maybe reinvest some of our money into more sustainability charities or efforts or whatever, and be to try and help them offset it. But you know, and what I really love about the Gen Zs is their true commitment to the environment, because you know it is in a bit of a tricky place right now. And I actually used with my nephew when he was having a little chat with me. You know, I used medicine and you know, the amazing benefit of AI in medicine and being able to speed up the process with obviously a professional. You know, I went to the doctor the other day and he took AI notes while he was talking to me, but what that meant then, he could actually properly speak to me because the computer was catching everything. And I walked away from the doctor appointment going, that was the best clinical experience I've had in years. So that was able to, so that's kind of where I was kind of I suppose, positioning the AI when I was having some pushback on it. But, you know, we don't have all the answers either, so.
We actually have an online question as well. So how should organizations adapt the 70-20-10 learning model in the context of AI-driven workplaces and evolving expectations of new generations, particularly when entry-level roles, which traditionally enable the 70% experiential learning, are being reduced or transformed because of AI?
Wow, that's one question. Whoever wrote that, thanks. I should have had more coffee. You know, when we think about the 70-20-10 model, you know, I see the 10% being the education bit in the classroom, but where the best bang for your buck is on the 70 and 20, and you can use AI to really enhance that. So if you think about the experience and the exposure, like with our AI coaching tool, they can actually do a feedback session with a persona and get feedback before they do the conversation, because often it's about getting the words out. And so then people feel that less fearful of having that conversation with that individual. I think with, sorry, the question's gone now. When it comes to entry-level roles, like I think AI should actually hopefully enhance the next gen's jobs coming through. If I take the example of IKEA, you know, they're no longer just call agents talking to maybe upset clients, because AI has already taken that brunt for them. But what they can do is talk about the room, the space, the color, whatever it might be. So, you know, it's very much about just integrating it in and trying to make sure and reassure the teams that AI is not there to replace them, but to enhance their experience. Because I see it as like my little executive assistant that I don't have, but I do have now because I've got AI. And it's just like, how can I use that to help me free up time so I can spend more time with my intern, or going out and meeting more of the teams so they have that more human-to-human touch as opposed to just doing something online.
I love that. I love how it's enhancing employee experience for you. Aine, I can't thank you enough for sharing your perspective on intergenerational teams. It was fascinating, and I think if you guys go into your app, you can connect with Aine, connect with one another, just a reminder there. But we've had some incredible expertise thus far, and I can't thank you enough for flying all the way in just to be here with us.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.